I just want to say I know a good optometrist.
Okay. Okay, and let's see, did I do that correctly? Record. Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second lesson in Megillat Esther, our Shiur, with the Hadassah Learning Group in Modi'in through Hadassah Israel, Levana chapter. So we're going to continue today's lesson after learning the history of a little bit about the history of how we got to the hateful, evil Haman in our last class, and how we got to Mordechai through Shimi ben Gera, who was his ancestor. Now, I just want to review a moment that when Bnei Yisrael came into Eretz Yisrael, after 400 years of living a tribal life, the different tribes, all of Bnei Yisrael, started clamoring for a king. So the request for a king was to Shmuel. Now, after Shaul and his inability to listen to God, and he is
Ronda, you've gone muted.
You're muted. Yeah.
So consequently, the Benjamites lose the opportunity to be the monarchy, and David Hamelech from the tribe of Judah becomes a king. After David's son Shlomo becomes king, the kingdom of Israel is split into two. We have the northern kingdom and we have the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom is not ruled by the Davidic line. It is ruled by everyone and anybody, and it is for most of the time of its endurance, it is according to Ezra, evil in the eyes of Hashem. Now, the Davidic line in the southern kingdom of Judah lasts longer than the northern kingdom. We know that the northern kingdom is exiled by the Assyrians and is scattered all over, and those are what we call the 10 lost tribes of Israel, although they have been somewhat found these days. The southern kingdom of Judah doesn't go into exile until Nebuchadnezzar comes in from Babylon. He destroys the temple, the first temple, and he takes the first wave of exiles. There are a second wave of exiles, and the first wave are the cream of the crop of the Jewish scholars, the politicians, the king, and the learned people, and among them is Daniel and Mordechai.
Right.
Mordechai and Daniel are contemporaries. Now, Mordechai we do not hear about in the book of Daniel. He seems to have moved out of the capital of Babylon and has gone towards the east. Now, during the time that we learn about Daniel, we learn about different prophecies from Jeremiah. One of the prophecies that we learn about is that the exile will be for 70 years. And during that time, Hashem wants the people of Israel to live a full life in Babylon and to pray for peace for the king of Babylon, because when there is peace in the kingdom, there will be peace for the Jews. Now, we also learn that there is a second prophecy of Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, and the second prophecy says that after the 7 years have been completed, there is a simultaneous second 70 years in which God will be waiting for the people of Israel, Bnei Yisrael, to come to him, to seek him out, and to pray for the return to Eretz Yisrael. Now, it's interesting to note that we are not sure from what date one 70-year period begins and ends, and when the second 70-year period, which is continuing simultaneously, but possibly a little bit later. And we don't know when those 70 years are up. In the book of Daniel, we find that Daniel is very concerned about the 70 years, and he studies the dates and he contemplates exactly what is going on, and he figures out that the 70 years is complete upon the death of Nebuchadnezzar and the new king, who is Darius the Mede. Darius the Mede rules for 1 year. And so Daniel prays to God, and he says to him, Hashem, you promised through your servant Yirmiyahu that you will bring us back to Eretz Yisrael after 70 years. Now the angel Gabriel comes to Daniel after praying all day and fasting and repenting for all of the Jewish people, and the angel explains that there are 2 70-year periods, and that Daniel has not calculated correctly. So Daniel, on behalf of the Jewish nation, has to be patient. Now, having said that, it's important to note that Daniel's calculation of the time period is, and I'm going to put on my glasses here. Daniel's calculation is that the time frame was that when Nebuchadnezzar assumes the Babylonian throne, and this is well before he comes into Eretz Yisrael and destroys the temple. So he starts his calculation in the Jewish year of 3319. Now, and then he prays to God and says, when will you make an end to this? In 3389. So that's 70 years. Now, you don't have this in front of you. I'm gonna go over other dates with you that you have, but I just wanted to tell you that that's the period of time that Daniel thought, from Nebuchadnezzar ascending the throne to Darius becoming king. He thought that was the end of the Babylonian kingdom, right before Darius takes over the kingdom of Babylon. Now, the next period of 70 years that is thought to be the first to end the exile was when Ahasuerus becomes king, and that's 70 years is calculated from the time of the destruction of the temple in 3327. So it was thought, and this is very relevant to our class, it was thought by Ahasuerus that when he becomes king, that it is the end of the 70-year period. Keep that in mind. It's a very important date. Now, the third person to make a calculation of the 70 years and the return of the exiles to Eretz Yisrael is Darius II, who is King Ahasuerus' son. And he calculates it from the time of the destruction of the temple in the Jewish year of 3338. Now, those two last dates are very important because they really affect our story of Megillat Esther, and we're going to learn how it affects it. So let's take a look quickly at the two sheets that you have. One is about secular dating of giving time periods to the chronology of Jewish history, and they're given to us in BCE dates, and the other is from the chronology of according to the Jewish sages, and they're also given to us in BCE dates. Now, why is that when we actually are calculating time from the beginning of creation? So the Mefarshim tell us, our sages tell us that they're giving us these dates which have a major discrepancy, especially during the time of the Persian Empire, because the Christian world, the Gentile world, started dating things, giving year dates according to their calendars. And once the Jews went into exile, we had to not only use the Jewish calendar to calculate dates and times and places, but we also had to use their dating and calculating. And we don't know how many days, how many weeks, months, etc. made a year. And don't forget, there's leap years, and the Jewish calendar accounts for that. In many instances, the calendars that were used prior to the Gregorian calendar were very, very different types of counting of days. So so if you take a look at where it says at the top, Book of Esther, and then at the other one, it says the standard chronology, you'll notice, take a look that the time of the destruction of the temple is as we know it, 586 on the secular calendar, but it was actually 422 according to the dating of the Jewish calendar. Now, let's take a look also. Cyrus the Great takes over after 1 year rule of Darius. Darius only ruled for 1 year. And it's interesting to note that Cyrus the Great on the Jewish calendar takes over from Darius in 370, but he takes over in, let's see, he takes over in 530 of the secular calendar. So we lose time, we make up time. If you notice that in 363, Esther becomes the queen of Persia. But if you look at the secular calendar, it's 520. So we've lost 100 and some years in that area. And then if you look on the Jewish calendar, it says 354. Haman plots and has his downfall. On the secular calendar, Haman is plotting and downfall is not until 474. So you see that there is a big discrepancy, and because we don't know, everyone should be muted until the end, please. So we really have to make a decision of what dating we want to use in this shiur. The dating that I have selected is going to be the Jewish calendar because it makes more sense. Now, in the secular calendar, they've put in various people who may have had a couple of months of rule. They may have been killed, they may have died, they may not have been legitimate heirs to the throne. So we really don't know in the secular world how they were coming up with some of these dates. So we are going to, you can put away your secular calendar, and we're going to use only the Jewish calendar dating. Okay, so let's get started. Now, why did I start today's lesson talking to you about the Jeremiah's double prophecy of the 70 years? Well, it's very, very important and extremely relevant to the story of Esther, the Megillat Esther. Now, it is also very important for us to note that in the ancient world, everybody knew about everybody else's gods. So the God of the Jewish nation was very well known because of the miracles that that were performed by the God of the Jewish nation. And most nations actually feared the Jewish God. That is one of the reasons that the Assyrians, when they exiled the northern kingdom, scatters the Jews all over the place. They don't just come in and take over. They take, and what they do is have a population exchange. They bring in non-Jews to Eretz Yisrael, and they take the Jews and scatter them throughout their kingdom, hoping that the Jewish God will not find them. That is their belief. Now, understanding that, everyone knew that God, the God of Israel, was extremely powerful, and because it was an invisible God, our God cannot be seen, then the monarchs, the emperors, the kings were very afraid of the God of Israel. So many times they consulted, in fact, most of the time, they consulted their magicians and astrologers to give them information about what's good to do at this time. Should I attack? Should I stay home? Should I engage in war at this time? And a lot of times, what the astrologers had to tell the emperor or king was so relevant that it really had a lot to do with the course of history, as we will see in Megillat Esther. So, having said that, and understanding that every king in Babylonia was fearful of God. So when the great grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, takes over the throne, he calculates that 3 years into his reign, the 70 years had passed. And because it had passed and God had not redeemed the people of Israel, he figures that God has abandoned the people, and he throws a party. It is a very lavish Babylonian party, lots and lots of drink. And what does he do? He himself orders that all the kalim from the temple taken from by Nebuchadnezzar and kept in the treasuries of Babylon be brought out and used at this time in his party. While the people are drinking non-kosher wine in these kalim from the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, the Belshazzar sees handwriting on the wall. And this is a story in Sefer Daniel, where all of a sudden there appears a hand and it is writing words on the wall at the party. Now, Belshazzar becomes very worried and scared to the point where he doesn't know what to do. He certainly can't read it. And the queen has to remind him that Daniel is the one who his father and great-grandfather had used in all matters concerning the Jewish nation and anything that they didn't understand. Daniel is brought in. He interprets the handwriting on the wall, which is in Aramaic. And basically what Belshazzar is told is that the kingdom will be coming to an end, that his worth as a human being is less than half a shekel, and that night Belshazzar is murdered, and that is the end of the Babylonian kingdom. And that is why Daniel thinks that the 70 years is up. Okay, now, understanding that the Darius, the Mede, conquers the Babylonian Empire, takes over for only 1 year, and with his death, Jeremiah's first prophecy has been fulfilled, and the Babylonian Empire had been finished and someone else had taken over. Now, what does Jeremiah's second prophecy mean? Well, right after Darius the Mede dies within the year of his taking over Babylon, Cyrus the Great takes over and becomes king in the Jewish year of 3390. And in 3391, his advisors tell him that the 70 years has finished for the Jewish people, and since Jeremiah's first prophecy about the 70 years, he calculates it from the destruction of the temple. Now, there are many political reasons why Cyrus allows the Jews to go back to Eretz Yisrael. And he makes a pronouncement. We learned about the cylinder of Cyrus, which is written and is in the museum, I think in Persia, Iran, that states that the Jews can go home, that because Cyrus felt that he was helped by the Jewish God and that, to take over from Darius the Mede, and that now that he sits on the throne, He has been blessed by the God of Israel, and the Jews get to go home. But we find that all the Jews do not go home. Some of them are well ensconced in staying in what was called Babylon, and now is called Persia. Now, interestingly enough, since the 70 years had passed and he had allowed the Jews to return home to rebuild the temple, he is short-lived on the throne. He dies a year later after he allows the Jews to go back. And Ahasuerus becomes king. Now, there is a disagreement by some of the sages, and some say that Ahasuerus was the son of Cyrus the Great. Some say that he was not the legitimate heir to the throne, and that he was not the son of Cyrus the Great. Either way, it's interesting how we see Ahasuerus as king of the Persian Empire. Nevertheless, we are going to assume the stance that he is the legitimate heir, and he succeeds his father, Cyrus the Great. And he is the one, Ahasuerus, who halts the construction of the temple at the behest of letters written to him about how the Jews, if they get a chance to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple, they will stop paying taxes to the Persian Empire and the king, and they will revolt against the king. Now, interestingly enough, the letter comes from several people. One is Haman's son, who helps write this letter. The other people are the Samaritans, who are living in Eretz Yisrael and don't want to see the rebuilding of the temple. And in addition, there are Jews who stayed behind during the exile, who were not included in Nebuchadnezzar's exile to Babylon, who do not want the rebuilding of the temple. These people had stayed behind, intermarried, and barely are considered to be Jewish, and they have a real issue with the building of the temple. So we see that the letter that comes from Eretz Yisrael is initiated and instigated by the son of Haman, who is in Persia at the time. Now, why is Haman so adamant that there should not be the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the Beit HaMikdash? It's a very interesting question. Now, Amalek, we know that Haman is from Amalek. Amalek is descended from Esav. Esav was who? He was Yitzhak's son and Yaakov's brother. Remember that story where Yaakov tricks his father to get the blessing, and Esav sells him the Bechorah, the blessing of the firstborn? Well, interestingly enough, the Yaakov's blessing, in Yaakov's blessing that he receives, Yitzhak says that his descendants will gain permanent ownership of the Holy Land by building the temple. Therefore, Haman knows this, and he, an Amalekite, tries as hard as possible to prevent the temple from being built, because he knows that once the Jews build the second temple and rebuild Jerusalem, they are going to continue to live in Eretz Yisrael forever. And he, the Amalekite Haman, does not want that to happen. And so he does everything possible to prevent that. Because of that, he advises Achashverosh to halt the building of the temple. Now, he allows Haman, I'm going into the story a little bit because I want you to understand the background before we actually start reading the text. So, Achashverosh allows Haman to make his decree against the Jews because his astrologers had told him that a Jew would wear the crown of kings in Persia. So fearing this, Achashverosh allows the decree by Haman that the Jews be exterminated to go out to all 127 provinces of his kingdom and of his empire. However, it's very interesting. Remember way back when, we go back to Egypt a lot, but remember Paro also had, from his astrologers and magicians, were told that he would be usurped by a Jew. And so he is, that's why he kills the Jewish babies. Now, interestingly enough, 1,000 years later, the king of Persia is told by his astrologers that a Jew would wear the crown of the king and be king of Persia. And this worries Achashverosh. And so that's one of the reasons he is amenable to the decree of Haman. We're going to talk about that a little bit more when we get into the story. Achashverosh does not know that he is going to marry a Jewish woman and have a Jewish son who will take over the kingship when he dies. And so that fear that of the Jewish God is foremost in Achashverosh's mind. So this is very, very interesting intrigue that happens based on the letter that Haman writes. I want to read you a little bit of the letter, if I may, because it's very interesting. Now, the letter is as follows, and it's sent to Achashverosh. If the Jews are allowed to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, a great rebellion will take place. You know how important the walls of Jerusalem were. Nebuchadnezzar could take the city only after a long siege, and when he took it, he had the walls torn down and the inhabitants driven into exile. Only then could his followers feel safe. You, meaning Achashverosh, should not allow the Jews to rebuild the walls. If they do, they will rebel and refuse to pay taxes and tributes. Since we eat the king's bread, in other words, we're employed by the king, and so these people don't want to lose their employment or their paycheck. Since we eat the king's bread, we love him very much and do not want to see him suffer and any losses. We therefore advise that permission to build be withdrawn. Interesting that that's the letter that is sent to Achashverosh, penned by many different people, one of whom is Haman's son, most likely at the behest of Haman. Haman is running a lot of things behind the scenes, and that brings us to the whole concept of the story of the Megillat Esther being a lot of hidden or concealed things that happen. And that's one of the reasons, we say, well, why didn't the name of God appear in the book of Esther? Well, that's another thing that is hidden and concealed. Now, Esther's name, Esther, she was born and given the name of Hadassah, but the name Esther comes from the root of the Hebrew word satar. Satar means to be hidden. Esther means I am hiding. And we know that she hides her identity for a long, long time. We know that many things that she does is done secretively throughout the book. And the book speaks of hidden miracles that were concealed and hidden that we didn't realize would happen, but God is working behind the scenes. Another thing is that the one very surprising incident in the Megillah is Esther's marriage to Achashverosh. The marriage of Esther to a non-Jew was very unusual at the time, and no one could understand that by doing so, she would have the chance to save the Jews. So that was another hidden reason of why she has been chosen to be queen. She also requests that the Jews pray and fast and repent to overturn the decree of Haman. And so she is rewarded because she is so concerned with the Jews and saving them, she is rewarded with the name of Megillat Esther rather than Megillat Mordechai, Megillat Haman, Megillat Achashverosh, whatever. She is given the merit because she is so concerned with the praying, fasting, and repenting, which are the words that are used in Jeremiah's prophecy for the Jews to go home, that they have to repent, they have to fast, they have to pray in order for God to recognize that they are seeking him out. So it's very interesting that she, the woman, is so concerned with the prophecy and of the Jews. Now, before we start, we're going to learn a few other interesting facts. Achashverosh, his name, there in the secular world, there was no name Achashverosh, the king. Ahasuerus was really the Persian king Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes. The Jews called him Ahasuerus, which is Aramaic for leader. And so Achosh is the Aramaic for leader, and Rosh in Hebrew is head. So he was the leader or the head of the Persian Empire. It was like calling Paro, all the different Paros of Egypt by a generic name for ruler. So Ahasuerus is the word for leader according to the Jews, and you won't find the name Ahasuerus in the secular dating chronology of Persia. Okay, now, are we ready to begin the text? Does everyone have the text in front of them? Okay, I hope so. We are going to open up our Megillat Esther to the first page, Pasuk Aleph, line 1. And we're going to read begin the story of Esther. Now, we are going to learn a tremendous amount in the first paragraph. And I want you, as we read the English, to listen to not necessarily all the things that are said, but things that are not said. And keep in mind that this book was written by Esther and Mordechai at the end of the Megillat Esther story, the story of the Jews in Persia, and it was sent out as an official document throughout the kingdom to the Jews. Now, had a lot of words that are missing been put in, it might have sounded treasonous to the king, and consequently, it would have not been able to be published and sent to all the Jews throughout the kingdom. Don't forget, there were scribes reading the text that went out from Mordechai and Esther, and they were determining whether it was in fact before or against the king. So many times things were written that make Ahasuerus or Haman sound different than possibly they actually were, in order to go through the censors of the times. So keep that in mind, that things, not only God's name is hidden, but things are hidden and implied. And we have to be smart enough to find out what those things are, because there are words throughout the entire text that allude to different events that happen. And it's important to keep that in mind. So, having said that, we're going to start reading, and let's go, okay? And it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from Hodu to Cush, over 127 provinces, that in those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was in Shushan, the capital, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials and his servants his army of Persia and Media, the nobles and officials of the provinces being present, and he displayed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days. Now, those 4 psukim give us huge amounts of information, really huge amounts. So let's start with the first sentence, okay? First of all, it says, and it came to pass in the days of Achashverosh. Now, it doesn't say that he was the son of anybody. He does, and so that's why it alludes to the fact that he may not be the son of Cyrus the Great. It is an allusion to possibly that he takes the throne for himself. So also, it says, in the days of Achashverosh, the Achashverosh, who reigned from Hodu to Cush. If he was the legitimate king at the time, don't you think that the word king would be put in front of his name? So that's another question. If it isn't said to be king, are they not honoring him as king? Or is he really not the rightful king? So that's a question that the Meforshim contemplate. Now it says that he reigns from Hodu, which is India, to Cush, which is Africa, that is south of Egypt. Now, interestingly enough, there were, in the time of Achashverosh, more provinces than the 127. But he went to war with, his father went to war with the Greeks, if we consider Cyrus the Great his father, and he lost. And so some of the provinces that had been part of the Persian Empire no longer existed as part of the Persian Empire. And that's why it tells us from Hodu, India, to Cush, Africa, are the 127 provinces. In those days, now it says, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, it's very interesting to note that there's a story behind that pasuk, because when Nebuchadnezzar looted the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, he takes the throne of Shlomo HaMelech, the golden throne of Shlomo HaMelech, and he takes it back to Babylon with all the other spoils from the temple. And that's how Belshazzar inherits all of the kalim from his great-grandfather who had looted the Beit HaMikdash. So it's interesting to note that originally Nebuchadnezzar sat on the throne of Solomon, but apparently he felt it was a curse, and he puts the throne away and no longer sits on it. So now in Persia, now that they have taken over all of the kalim and all of the things that from the Beit HaMikdash, the inheritor of the throne now becomes Ahasuerus. And in the conversation that the sages talk about is that he sat also on Shlomo's throne. But the minute he heard that from his astrologers that a Jew was going to take over the throne, he also puts the throne of Solomon away and no longer sits on it. And that's why it says right here, King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne. In other words, he had his own throne made, and it wasn't the throne of Solomon. It also tells us the location of this throne, of where he sat, and that was in Shushan, the capital. This is the first time that Shushan is the capital of Persia. Up until this point, Shushan was not a city, and Ahasuerus makes it a city and makes it a dazzling city for all to see, with his wealth and his riches. Now, so now we know that we have a king Ahasuerus, which is really Artaxerxes, and his capital is in Shushan. And then we read in Pasuk 3, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials, and it goes on and on and on to tell us who is invited to the party. Why is the king making a party in his 3rd year? He certainly, anybody who is a crowned or anointed king or emperor would make a party in their 1st year to celebrate their ascension to the throne. Well, in the 3rd year of Ahasuerus' reign, his advisors calculated that the 70 years had passed from the first exile of the Jews. And so he had nothing to worry about in terms of any Jew taking over his throne. So why is he making a party in the 3rd year? Because since the 70 years were over, he felt God had abandoned his people and no longer posed a threat to the Persian Empire. So he threw a party to celebrate that he was officially the king. So that's why we have twice Ahasuerus, and then we have Ahasuerus, because it indicates Ahasuerus in the 1st year, Ahasuerus in the 2nd year, but in the 3rd year, it's King Ahasuerus. He is certain that he is the king and that the Jewish God will not depose him. So do you understand the hidden? Do you see how we are learning about hidden things? Now let's continue. He tells us, we are told all the different people that are invited to the party. First comes the nobles and all of the army. A king, an emperor needs an army to protect him. He needs the nobles to make sure that he stays in power. Now, why this lavish party? Well, if you are sitting in India, or you're sitting in Africa, or anywhere in between, and you're running a province for an emperor that you are collecting taxes for and ruling in his name, sometimes you might feel a little disconnected. Sometimes you might feel, as a governor or the head of a particular area, that you should be given a raise in your pay. You should be given a better job. You should be given more money. You should be given a better house. Well, the king felt that if he invited all these people to the party and told them they could stay for as long as they wanted, and that they would get beautiful gifts to take home with them, that would elevate their esteem and their feeling for being an employee of the king. It stands to reason that those closest to the seat of the throne of Shushan would probably get to the party sooner, and those from far away would get there later. So it was not that everybody came on one day, like a bar mitzvah or a wedding. They all came at scattered times, and they stayed for as long as they felt they could. Depending on how long it would take them to get back, that's how long they would stay. And so they received beautiful, beautiful gifts from Achashverosh. They were able to eat and drink as much as they wanted. They could bring their families. So it was like, let's go to visit Achashverosh time. And they could pack up their kids and have a road trip to the kingdom and the seat of the where the king was. Interestingly enough, Achashverosh invites also his servants. It mentions his servants. Why would a king want to invite servants? Well, the same reason he would want to invite the army and the governors. He needs everybody's help in maintaining the fact that he remains king. So another reason that he throws the party in the third year is because that is the year he marries Vashti. So this is not only a celebration that he is king, officially king, without the worry of any retribution from the God of Israel, but it's also a wedding celebration. Now, I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to open up the floor to questions, but I'm going to stop the recording. So if you'll hold on one second.